Apunanwu lay lifeless in the depths of the river. A young mermaid found her and called on the attention of her mother. Her mother, staring at Apunanwu with so much pity in her eyes. "She's so beautiful," she whispered to herself. "Why would anyone think of hurting her?" she thought. "This girl is so pure. Humans are wicked." Once upon a time, the ancient kingdoms of Agulu and Ukani were ruled by two kings, Udobo and Ogene. These two kings were strong and brave men and also best of friends. They loved each other so much and were always willing to help themselves. Their strong bond extended to their families and even their kingdoms. Whenever there was war, both kingdoms teamed up together to defend one another, and also, during festivals, they celebrated together. The two kingdoms were far away from each other but had similar cultures. The two kings got married to their heartthrobs and swore to extend their friendship to their children. Udobo had a male child first and named him Akunna. Akunna was the exact replica of his father. Ogene's wife, on the other hand, was unable to have a child. But 5 years later, she had twins, a boy and a girl. It was a great celebration in the kingdom, and the two kingdoms came together to celebrate this great blessing. This was when Udobo set his eyes on Apunanwu, Ogene's daughter. She was so beautiful and looked like a half-caste, her eyes glistening as the star. He called on his friend immediately and said to him, "This one is our own. My son will marry her. She's so beautiful and will make a good queen. I trust you and your wife to train her properly." Ogene laughed it off. He thought his friend was joking and didn't take him seriously. But a few weeks after, his friend visited again regarding the same issue. Ogene could not refuse his friend. He also thought the idea was a great one. After all, this would make the bond between the two kingdoms stronger. The date for the dowry payment was announced, and the both kingdoms earnestly prepared and looked forward to it. It was a great celebration, and the two children were joined together in marriage. Akunna was 5, and Apunanwu was less than a year. Apunanwu was to be raised to be a queen and would be taken to her husband once she clocked 18. As the two children grew, Akunna grew up to be a very handsome and good man like his father, humble and respectful. Everyone loved him so much. Apunanwu, on the other hand, grew up to be a stunning maiden. Her face like that of a water goddess, and her poise was extraordinary. As her name implied, she really was Apunanwu, meaning she was too beautiful to go out under the sun. In addition to her beauty, she was so kind like her father, and people loved her so much. She was always indoors and only went out on special occasions. Whenever she stepped out, the villagers would always gather to watch her. She was that beautiful. The news of her beauty got to Prince Akunna, and it made him so happy. He couldn't wait to have his wife. He was not allowed to see her before the day he was meant to uncover her. He could only console himself with the stories he had heard about her beauty. Darkness covered the two kingdoms when King Udobo and his wife traveled to a faraway land to make their usual sacrifice, which they made every year. As they rode back home, they were invaded by thieves and killed. The news shook the two kingdoms, and King Ogene refused to be consoled, as the death of his dear friend came as a rude shock to him. He took off his clothes, shut the door, and cried like a baby. The queen, who understood his plight, let him be. After the funeral of King Odobo and his wife, the kingdom of Agulu was handed over to his young son Akunna to be guided by Odobo's trusted chief until he was mature enough, and from time to time, King Ogene checked up on him. 2 years later, Apunanwu was ripe to be taken to King Akunna. Akunna could not contain his joy. He was so eager to have his beautiful wife Apunanwu. A big celebration was planned to send her off, and Apunanwu dressed up and was set to move. After the send-off party, her maid was instructed to go with her. Agulu Kingdom was far from Ukani, so the journey was going to be a long one. They were to cross 7 rivers and 7 mountains before they got to Agulu. The 2 women set out on the journey, the maid taking the lead as she knew the way. When they had gone halfway, the maid said to Apunanwu, "My queen, you must be tired and need some rest. Why don't we take a bath and then continue our journey?" Apunanwu felt it was a good idea, as she was heavily adorned and felt sweaty. But unknown to Apunanwu, her maid Omasiri harbored an evil plan. She was jealous of Apunanwu as she had everything. Apunanwu was the sunshine itself. You could stare at her all day without getting tired. And now she was going to get married while she remained her slave, having an advantage over her in age. When they got to the river to take their baths, the maid overpowered her, taking all her adornments and clothes from her and then pushing her into the river. Apunanwu, who could not swim to save her life, was immediately swept away by the water. The maid, satisfied with the way she had carried out her plans, set out and continued her journey. She walked through the rivers, mountains, and forests till she got to Agulu the following morning. A huge crowd was gathered outside the palace, and songs of joy filled the atmosphere. The king was disappointed when he saw her. Was this the beauty the whole world spoke about? She wasn't as beautiful as he had. Still, he trusted his parents and followed along with the ceremony, but deep down he wasn't happy. Something just wasn't right. The celebration intensified as the villagers welcomed their new queen. Back in the river, Apunanwu lay lifeless in its depths. A young mermaid found her and called on the attention of her mother. Her mother stared at Apunanwu with so much pity in her eyes. "She's so beautiful," she whispered to herself. "Why would anyone think of hurting her?" she thought. "This girl is so pure. Humans are wicked. And they are not only against us but also themselves." Moved by pity, they decided to save her. They took her to a safe place under the water and revived her back to life. When Apunanwu opened her eyes, she found herself in a beautiful place, covered with water and beautiful flowers. At first, she thought they had arrived at her husband's, and then her memories came back, and she remembered all that happened. She cried at the memory of what her maid did to her. Mother Shafi heard her soft cry and came into her room. She was happy to see her awake. Apunanwu was scared. She had never seen a being like her before. She was so beautiful but had a fish tail instead of legs. Mother Shafi, noticing her fear, told her how her daughter Linda had found her, and they had no intention to hurt her but to keep her safe. "We can send you back home if you want," she offered. Apunanwu looked around. This place was so beautiful, and the maid would make sure she died if she dared return home. She decided to stay back in the water where love and peace reigned. Apunanwu was a good girl and everyone loved her. She became best of friends with Linda, who was as sweet as her mother. She taught her how to swim and soon Apunanwu became so good at it. Apunanwu wasn't used to the water life. She always felt cold and always longed to have a sunbath. She told Mother Shafi, who said she could always go up to the land daily to have a sunbath as she pleased. Apunanwu was excited to have this opportunity. 2 years passed, and Oluchi the maid had 2 children for the king. They had both learned to live happily together. Apunanwu's body was now as slimy as that of a fish because she had stayed in the water for a long time. Every morning, as the sun crept up the sky, she would come up under a tree, wearing her maid's clothes to enjoy the heat of the sunlight. This was always her morning ritual. One day, as she was under the tree enjoying the heat from the sun, a palm wine tapper saw her. Her face looked so familiar, and he stared on to see if he could recall who she was. Apunanwu, was she really the one? He decided to call her name and see her reaction. Her face glowed under the sun, making her look like a goddess. Apunanwu, he called her. Immediately he called her name. She ran and jumped into the river. This confirmed his suspicion. For days he observed her and saw she came up every morning to have a sunbath. This wine tapper Uwakwe was from her village and knew very well that she had been given to the king of Agulu as wife. How come she was in the water? Was she a water goddess? Does that explain why she was so beautiful? He had to inform the royal family. The news was so strange to her parents when they heard it. Although they had never visited Agulu since their daughter was given to Akunna, they always sent gifts and asked after her. Omasiri the maid was very smart. She avoided everyone she knew and didn't allow them to see her. The chief priest was summoned immediately and was asked to confirm the story of the wine tapper. The chief priest affirmed it and told them how the maid pushed her into the river and married Akunna in the guise of Apunanwu. He further explained that Apunanwu now loved the water and would not want to return, but they had to bring her back. Her parents' heart was heavy with sorrow, and they sent out strong men led by the wine tapper to bring her home. A message was sent immediately to King Akunna regarding the maid, and it confirmed his suspicions immediately. Yet, he pretended he didn't know who she was, but stopped performing his marital obligations. He resented her so much and didn't want her anywhere close to him. How could one be this wicked, he thought. At the river, the men positioned themselves in the bushes surrounding the river. And as usual, Apunanwu came out to have a sunbath. The men rushed at her when they saw her, but her body was so slimy that no one could hold her. Thus, she escaped. They tried for days and all efforts proved abortive. When they came home, they narrated their ordeal and it weakened the king. He summoned his wise men and they came up with a suggestion that they get a good singer who would sing her a beautiful song, explaining how she was missed and why she should come home. If she heard this melodious voice, she wouldn't be able to resist it. The king rejoiced at the suggestion, positive that it would work. He summoned the maidens in the village that had good voices and chose the best. The next day, they set out to the river, and as she came up, the maiden began to sing. She loved the voice and got carried away. But as she heard footsteps, she immediately rushed to the water and jumped in. The king was disappointed again. They had tried several options and all proved abortive. The queen cried endlessly. There was this troublesome man in the village called Rope. He was very thin and tall. Fighting was like the air he breathes. No day passed without him looking for trouble and also fighting. He would circle around his opponent like a rope and pull him down. This earned him that name. One of the palace guards suggested they try to use him get her. The king, willing to try out any suggestion, summoned Rope and pleaded with him to help him get his daughter. They set out on a journey to the river and hid themselves in the bush as usual. Soon, Apunanwu came up and Rope rushed at her immediately. Her body was so slippery, but as she tried to jump into the river, he got a grip of her and circled around her. The other men hidden in the bush rushed out and grabbed her. They tied her up immediately and kept her under the sun so that her body could dry before they took her home. It was indeed a day of celebration, and the palace guard and Rope were rewarded handsomely. A message was sent to Apunanwu that his wife was back, and he told the maid to prepare a feast that his royal friends were coming. Unknown to her, he was going to bring back Apunanwu. King Akunna has decided to go bring her home himself, and taking some guards, they set out on their journey. Just as her name implied, she was breathtaking, and no beauty could compare her. He took his queen back home. Omasiri was shocked to see her. What? She thought Apunanwu had died. She immediately knelt down and began to plead for forgiveness. But the king's rage was greatly aroused, and he banished her from the palace immediately. He then lived happily ever after with his beloved wife, Apunanwu.